Our last speaker, James Luedecke. James Luedecke was born and raised in Northwest Arkansas. He lived in Oklahoma for 6 years and was an environmental engineer, and then he decided to quit and do the Lord's work. He and his family now live in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and they attend Green Country Church of Christ. For the last 3 years, he has been doing the work of an evangelist and has worked with the congregations in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee. This afternoon, James is going to be talking to us about complacency and teaching the gospel, something that we all struggle with, something we all need to think a little bit more about. It goes hand in hand with church growth, what Ian was talking about there at the end, the external growth. We have the internal growth we need to work on. We have the external growth we need to work on. I'm really looking forward to things James has prepared for us this afternoon, and I'm sure they're going to be very edifying. I'll turn it over to you.
I'd like to thank the three previous speakers that we've had today. They've brought some very timely information to us from God's Word. They've given us all some very good things to think about. So thank you, Jameson, Chris. Thank you, Ian, for teaching us today and challenging us and testing us. I'd like to thank the congregation here at Fairview for putting on this meeting. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort to make something like this happen and run smoothly. And I just feel like a congregation here at Fairview, its leaders, all of its members need to be recognized for providing such a great, wonderful weekend of fellowship for each and every one of us. Thank you for providing the meals, the fellowship. It's the highlight of my year to be able to come and see your faces and to spend time with you. Brother Jameson started his talk this morning with a dictionary definition of the word complacency. One online dictionary defines it as a feeling of being satisfied with how things are and not wanting to try to make them better. That's complacency. A complacent attitude is a very dangerous thing. We've already established that here today. We can become complacent about our health. We can become complacent about our finances. We can become complacent about our family relationships. Sometimes we do. And when we do, we get very cozy, we get very comfortable with mediocre health and mediocre finances and mediocre family relationships, and we just rock right along thinking we're okay until a day of reckoning comes, right? There's always a day of reckoning. Maybe it's a heart attack. Maybe it's a bounced check. Maybe it's a family fight. You see, in that day of reckoning, when it all comes crashing down on us, we come face to face with the fact that all along we had been our own worst enemies. We had convinced ourselves that everything was okay, when in reality, things were far, far from being okay in our lives. And you know, much worse than all of this, we can become complacent about our own salvation. The devil loves it when he can lull people into a sense of complacency and give them a false sense of security about their salvation. Complacency is one of the great tools of Satan himself. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you this morning, and I'm not going to talk an hour. But I hope that you will pay very close attention to the things I have to say, and I hope you'll follow along in the Scriptures, because I want to read from 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. The Bible says this. It says, "In whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them." The god of this world, that is Satan, has blinded the minds of millions of people and lulled them into a false sense of security about their salvation. And he does that through the preaching and propagation of many different kinds of religious lies. There's all kinds of religious lies out there today on radio and TV about salvation. They're everywhere. You've heard them, no doubt. The lies that, you can just be a good, moral, law-abiding citizen and that's enough to get you to heaven. It's a lie. There ain't a single one of us here, there ain't a single person on the face of the earth that can get to heaven without Jesus Christ. I don't care how good you are. Don't care how generous you are. Some people say, just ask Jesus into your sinful and wicked heart and you'll be good with God. It's a religious lie. Some say, just repeat some token man-made prayer and God will save you and you'll be good. It's not true. It's not scriptural. Hey, here's another religious lie we hear a lot about. You work really, really hard doing good deeds, religious deeds, and you can earn your way to heaven. That's not true. I could never earn my way to heaven. Neither could you. But these religious lies are talked about on the radio, on TV. Many people have believed these religious lies, and they've been lulled into a false sense of security about salvation. The people we read of in Matthew chapter 7 had become complacent about their salvation. When it says there in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven, right? Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils? And in thy name done many wonderful works? What does Jesus say in verse 23? And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. What was their problem? Complacency. They thought they were good with God, and they were surprised when they stood before Christ on the day of judgment. And He said, depart from me, I never knew you. It caught them totally by surprise. Complacency doesn't tell us to seek truth. Complacency doesn't tell us to strive for perfection. Complacency tells us to sit back and relax and get comfortable in our beliefs, whether they're right or wrong, and block out everybody who tries to tell us something that's different than what we want to believe. That's what complacency does. A lot of sinners today are sort of like this concrete block I brought in. They're just like this block. That's a heavy block. Brother Mike Greer helped me carry that into the building before lunch. Brother Mike's that a heavy block? It's heavy. A lot of sinners are just like that concrete block on that table. Newton's first law of motion that we call the Law of Inertia, it says that an object at rest, just like that block, will remain at rest until it is acted upon by some outside force. We all understand that, right? A lot of sinners are just like that block. They build up a force field of complacency around themselves so that they cannot and so that they will not let anyone move them to change their ways. They've grown comfortable being under God's condemnation, and there they will sit and they will not budge and they will not move no matter what you say or do. That describes a lot of people in this world today, and it describes their relationship with God. It's like a cancer that silently eats away at the soul. Complacency. It's going to deliver millions upon millions into an eternal lake of fire and brimstone. Now I want to stop you right there, brothers and sisters, and ask you a question. How does this make you feel? How does this make you feel to hear these things and to know in your heart of hearts that it's true? that many people are like that block. They're not going to budge. And they're going to spend eternity in the lake of fire. How does that make you feel? Sometimes we say, let them burn. They deserve it. Sometimes we think, let them burn. That just leaves more room in heaven for us. But you know what God says? God says in Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 23, He asks the question. He says, have I any pleasure at all that the wicked should die? Saith the Lord God, and not that he should return from his ways and live. Does God take any pleasure in the fact that millions are going to spend eternity in hellfire? Skip down to verse 32. Ezekiel 18, verse 32. He says, here's the sum of it all. I have no pleasure, God says, in the death of him that dieth, saith the Lord God. He says, wherefore turn yourselves and live ye. How does the thought of so many people being lost to hell forever make you feel? I know how it makes Brother Lindell Greer feel, because I've spoken to him about this, and I've heard him speak about how many are going to be lost to hell forever, and I've seen the tears well up in his eyes and roll down his face at the very thought of these things. When was the last time it broke your heart to think about people that were lost? When was the last time you shed a tear for the people all around us dying every day and going to a devil's miserable hell? See, brothers and sisters, this is one of the main reasons why we become complacent in sharing the gospel with others, because our hearts no longer break and we can hardly shed a tear for lost souls. That's got to change. That's something I've got to work on. It's something I want to challenge you to work on. That's got to change. Brothers and sisters, I'm here to tell you this afternoon that there is a force, a very powerful force, that can move the complacent sinner to seek God's salvation, and that force is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Paul said in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, he says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth. There is incredible and tremendous power in the gospel of Christ, the death, burial, and resurrection of God's only begotten Son, Jesus. I've seen it change the lives of so many people. The death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Has it not changed your life? You know, sometimes we forget, don't we? Sometimes we forget how much the gospel has changed our life. But stop and think about it. The fact that God's only begotten Son left the splendor of heaven and came to this poor and pitiful place called earth. The fact that He was born and found in the flesh just like we are today. They called Him Emmanuel, meaning God with us. He was God in the flesh. And because He was found in the flesh, He suffered all the same things that you and I suffer. He suffered pain. He suffered weakness. He suffered hunger. He suffered heartbreak. He cried tears of sorrow when His good friend Lazarus died. He suffered pain. He suffered persecution. He suffered betrayal. He was betrayed by one of His closest friends. He was delivered into the hands of the Jews who desired to kill Him. And that's exactly what they did, right? They took Him, they beat Him, they scourged Him, they spit in His face, they slapped Him with the palms of their hands, they plaited a crown of thorns and put it on His head, and beat it into the flesh of His brow with a reed. And then they put a cross on His back and told Him to march up to Mount Calvary. They nailed His hands and His feet to that cross and hung Him up between heaven and earth. to die, not for his sin, but to die for my sin and to die for your sin. Brothers and sisters, that's where the power is. That's where the power is that will move people and change their lives. It's in the gospel. It's the saving power of God. They took him down off that cross and put him in a tomb, right? But God triumphantly brought him forth from that grave early the first day of the week. Jesus isn't dead today. No, he's alive and at the right hand of God making intercession for you and me. Isn't that wonderful? It's the gospel. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's not complicated. It's not hard. It's not a story that we don't already know. That story is powerful, and it will change the lives of sinners if we will be bold and we will be brave and we will go share it with them. The gospel is powerful. Let me ask you a question. Aren't you glad somebody taught the gospel to you? Aren't you glad that somebody stepped up and spoke out and came to you and taught you the gospel? They loved you enough and took time out of their busy schedule to sit down with you, to study with you, to teach you the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Where would you be today if it were not for that one person who shared the gospel with you? Where would you be? Where would I be? You know, God just didn't reach down one day and miraculously plug into our minds and download the gospel into our brains, did He? No. God doesn't save people that way today. What did He do? He sent somebody to you. He sent somebody your way to teach you the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ and to teach you how to obey that form of doctrine in water baptism, right? Aren't you glad for that person who shared that truth with you? 1 Corinthians 1:21. 1 Corinthians 1:21. It says, "It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching." By the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. Let me ask you something, friends. When was the last time that you were that one bold and brave person who stepped up and spoke out and taught somebody the gospel? How long has it been since you led a soul to salvation? 6 months? 6 years? A lifetime? You know, it's easy to point the finger in shame at the complacent sinner who will not receive the truth of the gospel. But you know what the hard thing is? To think about ourselves and to think about how complacent that we have become and how stubborn we have become to not reach out and to not share the soul-saving gospel with others. This is the easy target, right? We'll blame it all on the sinner. This one's hard. When it falls on us and our failures and our weaknesses and our lack of courage and our lack of boldness, it's hard. But you know what? We can become just as complacent as sinners are out there in the world. We can become just as complacent. And we're good at making all kinds of excuses for not sharing the gospel. I've made excuses for not sharing the gospel with people. I say, you know, nobody loves the Lord. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Put it all on them. I say, you know what? Those sinners are too far gone. There's just no way that they'll change. Put it all on them. I've said, you know what? It'll take too much time, too much work. Put it all off on them. Therefore, we just feel justified in keeping the gospel all to ourselves. We become very comfortable and cozy and complacent in not sharing the gospel. We we don't want to budge. Just like that block on that table, we don't want to budge to share the gospel with somebody. Now listen, I realize that there are some people here who are actively going out there and sharing the gospel with others. I also realize that some of you probably are not doing that. And the purpose of my talk this afternoon was not to pat people on the back and give them an award for sharing the gospel with others. The purpose of my talk this afternoon was to address how we're going to overcome the complacency. The purpose of my talk was to wake up those people in this crowd today who are wasting one opportunity right after the other to share the gospel with the people around you. Opportunities are everywhere, folks. Are you wasting those opportunities? We spent about 6 weeks with many of you last fall in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. You welcomed us into your homes. You welcomed us into your congregations. You welcomed us into your lives. And for that, we are truly, truly grateful. We had a great time. We shared some tools with you to try to help and equip you to share the gospel with people in the everyday walk of your life. And I hope and I pray that you are putting those tools to good use today. You know, our primary goal in coming down last fall was really not to come to the Southeast and just evangelize everywhere. Our primary goal was just to equip the saints. But you know, in the process of doing that, we baptized 5 people into Christ. During that 6-week work, we baptized 5 people into Christ. And let me just be honest about it. We didn't have to look very hard, look very far, or work very hard to do it. We just sat down with people and we studied the Scriptures with them. And I say all this not to boast or not to rob any glory from God. I say all this to open your eyes to see that there are opportunities everywhere. The harvest is ripe for the picking. Jesus said in John 4:35, He said, "Lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest." In Matthew 9:37, He said, "The harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that He will send forth laborers into His harvest." The fields are white already to harvest. We just need more workers. We need you. Every single one of you. The Lord needs you. I don't care if you're old. I don't care if you're young. I don't care if you're male or female. I don't care if you're rich. I don't care if you're poor. The Lord needs you to get up and get out there and get involved in the harvest of the souls of lost men. He needs every single one of us to be involved in that work. Listen, when I look out on this crowd and I see the faces of those who've gathered here this weekend, I see a very special group of people. A very special group of people. I see a group of people whose faith in the Lord and whose love for the Lord and love for His church is unmatched. Unmatched. I see a group of people who are happy to share their time, their talent, their resources to help anyone in a physical way. I see that. I see a group of people who know the truth and who love the truth. I see a group of people whose influence runs deep and wide in your respective communities. I see all the ingredients. It's all there. I see it all right here in this crowd. What a waste it would be for us to not use all these great things to save lost souls. What a shame to let complacency get the upper hand with such a great group of people who have all the right ingredients to do it. Matthew 5, verse 14. Matthew 5 and 14. Jesus said, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick. And it giveth light to all that are in the house." He says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Are you sick and tired of the church not growing? Are you sick and tired of that? Get out and start sharing the light of the gospel with people. Get out and do that. Let your life be a reflection of the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. Share the gospel with others. When you do that, the church will grow. I don't doubt that for 1 minute. I've seen it happen too many times. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Paul did not allow himself to grow complacent in teaching the gospel. I want you to look at a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 16. He says, "For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. For necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me, if my local congregation doesn't grow." Is that what Paul said? No. What did he say? He said, "Woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel." The word woe there in the lexicon simply means a primary explanation of grief or sorrow. And look, I understand we all feel grief and we all feel sorrow when the church doesn't grow. It's easy and it's only natural to feel that way. In fact, I can't think of a single gospel meeting I've ever done where there wasn't at least one person who grieved and lamented about how the church is not growing. I hear it all the time, everywhere I go. And I suppose I've been guilty of it at different times myself. What we need to do instead is have more of Paul's attitude. He says, "Woe is unto me. I'm going to sorrow and I'm going to grieve and it's going to trouble me greatly if I don't preach the gospel, if I don't share the gospel with others. Woe is unto me. Woe is unto me." If we'll develop more of that attitude, the church will grow. I've got confidence in that. I don't doubt it for a moment. If we will truly develop this attitude in our hearts, woe is me if I preach not the gospel of Jesus Christ, the church will grow. It will. It takes a powerful force to overcome the inertia of a heavy object like these concrete blocks on this table. And it takes a powerful force to overcome complacency in our lives. My job today was to help provide that needed force. As much as I love each and every one of you, listen, my job today was not to comfort you and not to coddle you. My job today was to provide the needed force to help you overcome your spiritual inertia and your complacency in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. My job today was to say something or do something that would provide that force that would get you off the sidelines and get you into the battle for the souls of lost men. And I hope that maybe I've said something to you today that will push you in that direction. I'd like to end with a challenge to each and every one of you. I wouldn't ask you to do something I didn't think you could do. Every single one of you can do this. Even our young people can. In the next 30 days, I want you to be bold. I want you to be brave. I want you to step up and speak out and share the gospel with somebody. I'm not talking about a 2-minute conversation, Jesus died to save you. Have a nice day. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about with intentionally sitting down with somebody and opening the Scriptures and sharing the death, burial, and resurrection with somebody in your life. I'm giving you 30 days to do it. I'm not asking you to have it done by tomorrow. I challenge you to do that. I challenge each and every one of you to do that. Do it. And see what kind of good things the Lord will do when we get off the sidelines and when we get into the battle for the souls of lost men. I pray God's richest blessing for each and every one of you. Thank you for your attention to these things this afternoon.
But I feel like dirt. I don't feel very good. Thank you, Jameson. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ian. And thank you, James. Y'all all did a wonderful job. This morning we started off with Jameson, and just to give a short little recap, because we forget things. We learned the difference between complacency and contentment. We learned that if we need to challenge ourselves and ask the question. I really like this, James. I don't know if you came up with it. Are we true, faithful Christians, or are we just playing church? Are we really doing service to the Lord? Are we really seeking to thrive for Him? Or are we just playing around, just playing games, trying to fool people? Do we have a me mentality? Because that's what complacency is all about. It's all selfishness. It's all about me. It's all about what I want. I'm okay with where I am. I don't have to do anything for anyone else, and no one has to do anything for me. I got what I need. That's complacency, and that's a problem. He also gave us a contrast to that with contentment. And that contentment is not a focus on self, but a focus on others. A focus on the Lord's work. The focus on the things that needs to be done. And it is a focus that you can do anything you want because you have Jesus Christ. That you have the strength and the courage and the ability to do anything because you have the contentment and the power that is through Jesus. And the difference there is the conviction. The difference there is, what are you convicted to do? Are you convicted to please yourself or please others? Then we had Chris after Jameson, and he told us to get out of our comfort zone. We got to get out of our comfort zone. James' challenge there, that's getting out of your comfort zone. Having to make up your mind to go and talk to someone about the gospel. That's uncomfortable if you're not used to it. And even if you're used to it, I'm sure sometimes it's uncomfortable. We have to get out of our comfort zone and continue to excel, continue to grow, continue to do things for the Lord, and to focus on His will and not our own. After lunch, we had Ian. And Ian, you really stepped on my toes. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Ian told us that complacent congregations are the ones that are dying. They're the ones that are saying, I'm okay with what we got. We got enough people for now. We're doing enough things for now. We don't need to grow. We're all right. And he has challenged us to question if our heart is into our service, or are we just going through the motions? Are we just trying to satisfy those 5 things? Are we just trying to go through a checklist of things we have to do? Or are we really trying to do things for God? Are we really trying to put our heart into it? Are we really having a motive that is, I want to serve God, I want to edify others? That is what we have to do if we're going to have a church growth, not just internally, but also externally. We have to have that. We have to seek to excel by every person playing their role. Thank you for those thoughts, Ian. And then James just finished us up with challenging us with some really difficult questions. How do you feel thinking about the sinner? How do you feel thinking about the person who's going to hell? I don't always feel bad. I'm honest, I'll tell you. I don't always feel bad like I should. Sometimes I'm pretty complacent about it, because I got my own. We shouldn't be that way. We should feel something. We should feel godly sorrow to repentance over this. and seek to excel to Him. We need to grieve over not just their sins, but our own lack of action. We need to grieve over our own complacency and how lukewarm we are, and recognize the fact that sometimes Jesus would want to vomit because of the way we are and our attitude towards those around us. I'd like to share 3 verses that kind of came to mind as we were going through everything this morning. The first one is in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10. Galatians 1, chapter 10 says, For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. If you are complacent, you're trying to please man. You're trying to please yourself. If you're content, if you're doing the thing that the Lord wants, you're trying to please God. The second verse that came to mind was 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. This verse actually kind of makes me laugh a little bit because it reminds me of some real life scenarios where you have someone who says something like, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, and then starts telling you what to do. It kind of reminds me of this. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 9 and 10, it says, Now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all your brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more. You know how to love. You know how to do this. And you are doing it. But it's not enough. Because just like that bank account that's never full that Jameson talked about this morning, the amount we love, there's no capacity on it. We should always be seeking to do it more and more. Never be complacent. Never be complacent with your actions and what you're doing for the work of the Lord. And the last verse that came to mind is the good old love chapter in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. We can do as much as we want, but if we're not doing it with a sense of integrity and with a purpose and with a heart and motive that is into it, we're not doing it for the right reason. That was what Ian was talking about this afternoon. We can't just go through a checklist of things we have to do. We got to do it with a motive of love. Because the first and greatest commands is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, and all thy mind. And second unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. We need to have a motive that is love. That's what's going to give us the conviction. That's what's going to give us the contentment. And that's what's going to keep us from being complacent in our lives. And I am so thankful for each of the speakers this morning and this afternoon that have shown me that in my life, how I am lacking this motive in so many ways, and how I need to get up off my rear end and I need to do something, and how I may say, oh, I work so much, I do this, I do that, but so what? There's more I can do, right? And each of you as well. We don't need to be complacent. We need to put our heart into it. We need to have conviction. We need to feel godly grief over our own apathy and complacency. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you all, speakers, for the things you had to say.